Hello and welcome back, or welcome to the channel. I'm Loudguns, and in this episode we're going to be looking a bit more in depth at ground vehicles in Star Citizen. Just before we get going, a huge thanks to the people in the Frontier community who helped me with a lot of the testing for this vid. Thankfully we managed to wrap a lot of it up into a ground versus air event where we had a ton of fun. At the moment SC is really a sandbox, and getting involved with the community can be the best way to get the most enjoyment out of the game, so please feel free to hit us up over on Discord, link in the vid description down below. Also, if this video happens to be the one that tips you over the edge to getting a pack, just be sure to use a referral code when you create your account. Mine's up on screen, but really just make sure you use somebody's when you create an account for a bit of extra cash. Ground vehicles have a bad rep. A lot of folks will argue that anything a ground vehicle can do, a spaceship can just do better. And these little beasts often get written off as little more than a cash grab by CIG. To be clear, while I disagree with the first part, I will add a PSA right here at the beginning so nobody gets the wrong idea. I've stated an awful lot that I believe that all you need to enjoy Star Citizen is a basic starter ship game pack priced at about $45. I won't tell anyone how to spend their money outside of that. Maybe you earned it, maybe your granddad invented Oreos. Regardless, it's your cash, so you should decide what to spend it on. But while there are some people out there that are completely holistic about their pledges, people for whom it's not just about what ships they get, they just want to support the game's development, the truth is that for the vast majority of us we are paying for an advantage. Outside of playing games and running this channel, I personally have to work a full-time job to keep a roof over my head, get myself down the gym to offset that I drive a desk most of the day, and do actually well spend some time with my family. So parting with a bit of cash to have a couple of ships I really like on day one of the game is okay for me, since I know I won't have the time to grind that some people do. So if this is similar to how you're looking at things, ground vehicles do indeed suck as a cash buy. We know that the UEC prices are far below what they eventually will be. But just on a relative basis, you're getting a whole lot more utility out of your average spaceship than your average ground vehicle of an equivalent USD price, and the in-game prices are completely out of whack. The Anvil Ballista, for instance, has a standalone list price of $140, putting it on par with the Anvil Hornet Tracker. Meanwhile in-game the Ballista will set you back 364,500 credits, while the Hornet Tracker is 1,832,100 credits. For true dislocation, take a look at the Tumble Cyclones, all of which can be bought for the princely sum of 28k in-game, but cost between $55 and $80 in the pledge store. Did someone get fat-fingered with a decimal place, or am I just missing something? So I hope that goes some way to putting the cash question to bed, and from here on we can look at ground vehicles from a purely in-game perspective. If we agree that we're talking UEC rather than real money, are ground vehicles useful, or do they in fact suck? There are a couple of obvious use cases for ground vehicles. The rock mining buggy, for instance, is currently the main way to mine larger gem nodes. There is a trick to breaking them with a prospector, but even if you do this you'll need a rock to collect the gems efficiently. And ground vehicles like the Tumble Cyclone, and don't forget the Greycat PTV, can be great fun to race. But these are instances where the requisite ground vehicle is the only option, and they don't compete with ships. If we were to get a variant of the Argo MPUV with a size 0 mining laser, for instance, it would probably become the go-to for gem nodes ahead of the rock. But I think I've found three key areas of combat where ground vehicles can compete with ships, and arguably offer an alternative way to approach the same situation that could bring you out on top. First up is Infiltration. Let's just say that the combat wing of your org is running a training event at Jumptown. They've hit the ground site en masse and are keeping the airspace clear with fighters and air defences while they squirrel away all of the boxes of maize they can get their grubby hands on. You've been tasked with giving the cage a bit of a rattle to see how they can deal with a bit of friendly competition. And given you have fewer numbers than they do, you opt for a sneaky, stealthy approach, rather than a full-on confrontation that you'd probably lose. You could try to insert your two-person covert team using a small ship, and maybe with the power to your shields and weapons off you could lower your signature and make it in. But even with these measures you'd still be fairly easy to identify, either by signature or just visually by the trails your engines leave. So instead, me and John got as close as we dared in a cutty black with the shields and weapons all powered down, and we landed about 50 kilometers away from the objective. We then used the Cyclone to drive the rest of the way. There were times when we got pretty concerned about the vanguards and arrows buzzing a bit too close for comfort, but we remained completely undetected until we decided to ditch out 2 kilometers away from the target. Moving in on foot to sow chaos and destruction amongst our comrades was a rather enjoyable evening. But here the low signature and tiny visual profile of ground vehicles makes them perfect for this kind of infiltration mission. Hats off to Lion's Mane though for bringing my reign of terror to an end in such a stylish fashion. But there are some times when you're not seeking to go completely unseen. There are some seriously skilled pilots out in the verse, and ultimately there are some pitched air battles that you're just not going to win. But SC is trying to be an MMORPG, not a MOBA. It's not about winning a balanced game of skill, and there's no rule saying you have to fight fair and beat an opponent on terms that suit them. So while you might not be able to win air superiority over an objective, ground vehicles may well be a good way to at least deny it to an enemy. If you can place and maintain air defences and succeed in reaping a higher toll on the enemy than they can afford to replace, your org might be able to come out on top of a situation you would otherwise lose. Or you might at least be able to buy yourselves time to bring in the numbers required to turn the tide. Alongside a couple of the Cyclones, the Nova Tank and the Ballista, the new Anvil Centurion adds to the range of ground vehicles with significant anti-air capabilities. This newest variant of the Anvil Atlas platform has a quad-size 4 turret, akin to what you'd find on an Aegis Hammerhead, bolted to the chassis. We decided to put these principles to the test. We split into 2 teams and dropped 4 ground vehicles at a time 15 kilometers from a mining outpost on aerial. The challenge was for them to make the perilous journey back to the station while under attack from the air by the other half of our number. The air team were allowed as many respawns at Everest Harbour as they liked, while for the ground team destruction meant game over. We ran the event twice so that each group had a chance to play the air and the ground side, and the first column were defeated, but only 1.2 kilometers away from safety, and only after having taken a heavy toll on the air force. Partly this was due to our over-reliance on ballistas. We had 2 of these and 2 Centurions, and while the ballista were highly effective, their limited missiles made them sitting ducks once their ammo was dry. Admittedly, there may also have been an element of navigation issues with someone, me, choosing a route over a mountain that was annoyingly in our way. The second team, however, made it all the way to the mining outpost with 2 of their 4 Centurions intact. So in both cases, the ground team outkilled the air team. Particularly in the current light fighter meta, the Centurion is basically kryptonite versus what a lot of orgs would put out as a default combat force. A primary issue is actually locating your target. The Centurion and Ballista appear on passive radar at approximately 1.3 kilometers out, when you already are comfortably within range of their weapon systems. And combined fire from these vehicles can really just shred a fighter. Add to this that most single-seaters rely on getting their nose onto the target to fire accurate shots. All this time you're in the firing arc of the ground vehicle with less room for manoeuvre than you have against an aerial adversary. There are certainly some other options you could employ as the aircrew, one of the most effective being the use of heavier turreted ships such as the Redeemer. A ship like this could tank more hits and the turrets allow it to track ground targets while the pilot doesn't have to engage head-on. However, at least as the ground-based operatives, you've forced an enemy org to change up its mix, peeling it away from the light fighter meta, which may help you when your backup arrives. Also, keep in mind that this experiment was all occurring in the Hurston planetary system. Death has no real consequences, and the air team's respawn was a mere 50,000 kilometers away. So ships destroyed are replaced with a click of the button and a few credits for expedience. But in the endgame, there are going to be times and places where orgs simply can't afford to take these kinds of losses. And linked to this is the third area I feel ground vehicles can have a huge impact, and that's in objective control. The recent Jumpdown 2 events have been a great reminder of how combat will likely change in the future. I'm not anywhere near an expert on the nuances of fighter combat, go see Avenger 1 for that sort of thing, but my academic background is in military history, so the bigger picture of why battles happen and the logistics of larger scale conflicts interests me. I think JT is a good window into the future of what Star Citizen might look like in that regard. A big issue for combat in SE at the moment is that people run, and they run in a very big environment. I know people who have been called griefers for purposely getting a crime stat and waiting for bounty hunters to come to them, rather than play it the other way around and chase after bad guys. But the reality is that this is one of the best ways to get consistent fights, if you're actively just looking for some PvP. Chasing after a bounty, meanwhile, often just ends up in an endless cycle of QT jumps until someone gets bored and logs off. Jumpdown brought in an element of objective control though, so sure you can run, but if you run you're no longer the kings and queens of this hill, and this hill is profitable. Bringing in ground vehicles alongside an air squadron to help you secure a location like this can give you asymmetric conditions that ultimately lead to dominance of the area. Under denying air superiority, we already looked at some of the ways that ground vehicles can exhibit an advantage over ships, but here their lack of mobility can also be an advantage for you as an orc. It's really easy to forget just how fast you're going in a ship, plus you've got 3 dimensions to move in, so the potential for your ships to get out of position chasing an enemy is pretty high when you try to coordinate. It's very easy for individual pilots to forget their goal is objective control, not necessarily adding kill markings to their arrow. One or more of your pilots moving out of position can cause holes to open up in your defensive coverage, allowing an enemy ship to slip in and potentially insert ground forces, taking control of the objective away from you as an orc. The fact that ground vehicles are relatively immobile here helps to contain that possibility. If you down an enemy ship, that's brilliant, but if it runs away from your defences and therefore you retain objective control, also brilliant. I thought it'd be interesting as part of this video to come up with a few ideas of ways the ground game could evolve. First up, I'd say please give us more objectives similar to Jumpdown. Having an objective to control and defend gives meaning to fights and encourages players to fight even when their backs to the wall. There's room for these to be PvE as well as PvP focused, and with the new planetary nav mesh tech and missions with AI dropships providing reinforcements, it'd be great to see attack and defense missions that expand beyond the bunkers onto planetary surfaces. Secondly, there's a good possibility for missions that could reward approach by ground as opposed to by air, and we already see a bit of this with the bunkers getting meteor defences. But if we accept that Star Citizen is set in a universe where the power of the ship is greater than the power of the ground vehicle, then it would make sense that your average architect thought about this when designing buildings. Significant anti-air defences, such as the missile AA turrets we saw in the CitizenCon Pyro video, could push players towards a land-based approach. Siege of Orison has shown how a high-density set of air defences can make trying to take to the skies just pointless in certain situations. I particularly like the idea of an interlocked gameplay encompassing ground and air forces. I'm a 30-something making YouTube content on a space game, so it should come as no surprise to you that one of my favourite movies of all time is Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. In the opening scenes of that movie, the Empire, having located the rebel base on Hoth, is forced to attack by the ground because of the extensive shield arrays. So in order to open the window in the defences for the main assault by air, they have to get in by land. And this is exactly the sort of thing I dream of seeing realised in SC's endgame. Finally, I'd love to see some different vehicles or loadouts designed specifically to deal with ground targets from the air. The US Air Force developed modern air superiority tactics predominantly during the Vietnam War in response to losing so many aircraft to Soviet AA platforms. Certain pilots are trained in wild weasel operations to suppress and destroy enemy air defences. And they use certain anti-radiation missiles which have been designed to hone in specifically on the sources of radio emissions, such as radar antenna. So maybe we could see certain munitions that are specifically designed in SC for air to ground. There's also a lot of room within the bomber category of ships, so the Hercules A2 is our only current dedicated ground bomber, and while during Jumpdown the most common response I've seen to the oft-remarked JT friendly has been some version of "it is until I get there in my A2", the truth is that against vehicles like the Centurion and Ballista, the A2 kinda sucks. The bombs are slow moving and can be targeted, leading to most that I've seen dropped against a strong AA defense just blowing up harmlessly in the sky. I even had the joy of seeing one blown up so close to the A2 that dropped it that it ended up being the only casualty. So maybe we could see smaller, faster bombers that could drop smaller, faster moving bombs. Or potentially we could see cluster munitions that fragment and create many more targets to deal with. It'd be cool to see these sort of choices put in the hands of players. So you could bring weapons to deal more effectively with ground-based enemies, but these choices would negatively impact your ability to deal with aerial ones. Just before we wrap this video up, I did want to just stop and talk about skins a little bit, because it came up while we were making this video, and something about it just slightly made me a little bit nervous, I guess. I'm really keen on the idea of cosmetic items as a route to funding the game, and one of my favourite games outside of SC is League of Legends. I think the reason for that game's longevity is its funding model. High quality skins are one of the only ways you can spend cash, and they don't give you an in-game advantage. So the player who spends nothing is on an even playing field with the player who spends thousands. The player who spent money just looks more badass. And you know, looking cool is one of the only ways that us 30-year-olds can get one over on the kids wiping the floor with us skill-wise. But vehicle skins in SC have the danger of creeping into the realm of giving an advantage. One of the great strengths of ground vehicles is that they have such low signatures. They're hard to identify with your instruments and systems, so often you're relying on visual identification. So now if we're on Daymar and I have the option to buy a desert camouflage skin, that's an advantage. If I can only buy that desert camo for cash, then that's straight up pay to win. I know that CIG have said everything will be available to acquire in-game eventually. I just think that this is an area that we as players need to reinforce that we do actually want. I think it's really important that those of us who have maybe spent a bit too much real-life cash are also on the side of the gameplay, and don't start getting the idea that our dollars spent give us the right to beat down on players who have bought the base game. So I hope you enjoyed this video on the ground vehicles and their potential uses in Star Citizen. This is exactly the sort of vid I really enjoy making. It allows me to get my geek on posing the question and looking at the positives and negatives, but also gets me out there enjoying a couple of really cool events with members of our community. I know I said it before, but I'll say it again because it's important. This is by no means a recommendation to buy ground vehicles with your actual money. I would strongly recommend you make a few 100,000 credits and get some in-game to try out some of these matchups with your friends and org mates. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and if you've tried out some of the ground game, how you've got on. Conveniently, a comment is also all you need to enter our monthly giveaway, this month for an Origin 315p courtesy of a very kind org mate. By the power of RNG, I'll pick a winning video from this month's lot at the end of August, and then draw a commenter at random. Only one entry counts per vid, but don't let that stop us having a bit of back and forth. If you think I've earned it, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons to let the YouTube algo overlord know I'm doing a good job. And if you'd like to take things a step further, I do have a Patreon which you'll find in the description below. With all that said, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.